All right, and we are live. Just 1 minute to 1 o'clock. Had planned on being live 5 minutes to just to start counting it down, but unfortunately, I had a minor interruption where I needed to pop out and make sure that headphones were plugged in the living room, since years ago when I hadn't done that, ended up with a copyright claim about 10 minutes in the middle of one of my live stream sessions of the third alpha, which kind of sucked to have to cut time out of it. So anyway, double checking audio is coming through real quick. And it seems that that is going through to the live stream. So that is all set. All right. And one last thing, just to temporarily mute the server so it doesn't ping me. And we are set. Take a quick sip of some Diet Mountain Dew Baja Blast. Not sponsored, but if they feel ever like sending a whole bunch of free cans of it, as long as it's the diet one, I certainly would not turn that down. Alright, so this is another live stream within the FARAD system, specifically within the Aniloca Aethrix of the Aethrixian universe. The Aniloca Aethrix contains a number of different settings that will be released for the FARAD system. They include what will be one of the main primary ones, Legends of Lenida, and also Under the Guilty Suns, and quite a few others, including some that are based on a version of Earth. And Legends of Lenida specifically was the first setting that was created for the FARAD system back before it was even called the FARAD system. Legends of Lenida was specifically created when it was originally called Myths and Legends. It was created with inspiration from two co-workers and friends of mine from the local Walmart that I work at, one of which is still working there, and the other one does not work at that location anymore and works for another company. They both ended up playing solo with me running as Arbiter for a couple of sessions at my apartment. They both ended up playing a session or two each, where they played with another person who was at my apartment, and there were a couple of people who played a singular session at that time as well. And this is all when it was in the second alpha. The first alpha I started, and then started the FARAD systems for setting Legends of Lenida as it was Myths and Legends. The first alpha only lasted about, I want to say, 2-3 months, and then I switched it over to the second alpha, and that is what was played in that time. I also ran it for a bit myself. I updated a blog spot, which still is up and contains a lot of information on it as it was in that state. And then it updated to the third alpha, and that is when one of the two friends who inspired it Tom Smith, Arundel, as they were known within the first of 3 overlapping campaigns in Lenida, would join and play in it. I had my co-owner and the CEO of First Taste Multimedia, Adam LaValle. He played in it for a short little bit. Didn't have a lot of time, but he wanted to at least give it a shot and see what it was like. While it wasn't within that campaign, my girlfriend at that time played in one of these cities that's on Lenida, Dunkelstraat, and she made a character, and I have a piece of artwork from her, of her character, and we're still friends, though the relationship was not suitable in that for both of us, different future plans and goals and all that jazz. But it was a mutual breakup, and as I said, we're still friends. So, and the Lenida, I ended up utilizing also when writing stories within it. Metal Mage, a comic book series, which I hired somebody, and we got some artwork done for it. I may show a tiny bit of that in the stream, depending on subjects that get covered, and whether or not I end up having any questions from anybody who may or may not stop in. And in addition to Metal Mage, there's also the Adventurer Guide, done by an artist, Andrew Henry, from Egypt. He's a good friend who I've worked with in the past on a few projects that we tried getting off the ground. And there's also the Empires of Night, which will take place around the time that the 3 overlapping campaigns had taken place. However, I had started on it before the 3 campaigns had begun, so they're sort of different timelines than what happened on those live streams. And then there's also earlier in the timeline of Lenida going to be other books that will be released. The Forge of Twilight series, starting with the first book, Dross of Sorrow, then the second book, Annealed Rage, then the third book, Hammered Hope, the fourth book, Ground in Shadow, and the fifth book, Quenched in Blood. And that is going to take some time for me to work on, since I set it aside while I was working on started reworking on the 4th alpha of the FARAD system last year, little before last year with December of the previous year, but pretty much just right before the OGL scandal hit. And that series, I did end up writing the majority of the first 3 books. Actually wrote the first 2 as a singular book before deciding I needed to split it because I had so much more scene-wise and character development that I wanted to expand upon. And so it had ended up changing from my original plan of a trilogy into a 5-book series, possibly with a spin-off from another character's perspective later on. But coming across Douglas A. Burton's The Heroines Labyrinth through Heath Robinson's channel, The Geekverse, I will be doing some restructuring of Dross of Sorrow to better fit toward the Heroines Labyrinth story structure and archetypes that are within it, as the hero's journey wasn't precisely what I was seeking with the story, though it will be largely the same as it was, just expanded upon, little tweaks here and there. And also ensuring that I'm going to be satisfied with it before I either attempt to pitch it anywhere or self-publish, depending on how things are going financially at the time and what networking I may have done. Because it's certainly something that I understand that a lot of publishers prefer not to have a series as a first release, debut novel, but it's significant enough for a multitude of reasons why I'm going to go that route if I am able to do so. And then there's also another novel that will take place earlier in Lenida's history, which will be Bone Shaker, about Wayland Shars, the great Goblin General, the one who makes the bones sing, as he was called in the 3 overlapping campaigns a few times. And he will come up in today's live stream here and there, because today's live stream is primarily aimed at looking at some of the history of Lenida and some of the lineages that exist there. So, previously, when we were looking at the cosmology of the Aniloka Aetherix, we talked about how the Aetherix itself was formed, and other Aetherixes were formed as well, some of the realms, some of the lineages of higher beings, the Numina, briefly mentioned, the first Fae, the first Celestials, first Infernals, and the Bodals, the Prager and the Atacria, and Lenida itself also was mentioned specifically with reference to the last station and humanity and dragonkind coming from a previous Aetherix and arriving on to the Aniloka Aetherix, orbiting a artificially created black hole, which dilated time as probes prepared planets for settlement, one of which was Lenida. So, looking at the timeline, I do not have graphics up for it. There's still a lot of different events to figure out the exact timing, but the timeline itself is split into two major sections for Lenida's history itself. There's technically 3 if you count the time before humanity and dragonkind arrived on it. There were things that existed then, some of which still exist, but the probes were designed to try and guide evolutionary processes toward the history of what had been documented that humanity and dragonkind had on their home worlds, and to try and find a balance of species that could survive and produce a viable atmosphere for both humanity and dragonkind. Most settlement ships didn't put them both on the same planet. Lenida is one unfortunate situation where they were, and they took offense to that, to put it mildly. But yeah, the 2 major periods are what is known as before Foundation War and post-Foundation War. They're not the same as on our Earth before Common Era and after Common Era, when the calendar was decided to be this particular time, specifically because that on Earth was decided after the point, and in the case of the Foundation War, that was decided pretty much as soon as the Foundation War itself was over, rather than quite some time after the events had happened and trying to estimate how long that it had happened. There is a span of 47 years that the Foundation War itself was fought. However, the Foundation War and that time is more or less referred to as the number of seasons in the Foundation War rather than years, because the war itself hadn't started before the first season of the Foundation War, and the war itself ended with the last season. And I see Gaming Wolf has made it, so... And you just caught me as I'm starting to go into the timeline after a little bit of setting things up about what Lenida is. So, as I was saying, yes, the two major eras are before Foundation War and after, or post-Foundation War, even though there's some things that occurred before Lenida was settled by humanity and dragonkind properly, and things that happened during the Foundation War itself. In negative 1757, before Foundation War, is when humanity and dragonkind would arrive on Lenida after their respective settlement ships fired upon each other. Both sides claimed that the other attacked first. Tesaria is settled by humanity and dragonkind in that year, with the wreckage of those settlement ships still being durable enough to land. And in fact, some of the technology from those settlement ships still is operating, even a few thousand years later. However, it is not in any sense sufficient enough to take it back into space without a significant amount of reconstruction from somebody who knows how any of that technology works. And there are multiple reasons why a lot of people don't know how that particular technology works. First and foremost, those settlement ships were not designed by humanity or dragonkind, but created by the last station. And their own ships that arrived on the last station were disassembled in order to become parts for future ships for other species that would be rescued from other Aethrixes. In negative 1720, the First Mage War began between humanity and dragonkind. Tesaria was covered in an arcane hurricane until positive 280 post-Foundation War, which comes up to 2,000 years, which is specifically how long that the spell had ritual had been created to try and protect the territory that humanity had. Some of it with the arcane hurricane shifting more than they had intended. They weren't able to simply hide away in the eye of the storm. However, there was some remnants that were in stasis underground, and so there are occasionally popping up through history individuals who had been in stasis until somebody either woke them out of it or until power drained low enough, and that can lead to some issues when the technology that they are used to is not available, and the magic that they are used to is likewise not available, and having to adapt to how things are. And I will show briefly part of the map of Lenida, and this is specifically where Tesaria is, first showing it as it is itself, and there will be the Chimeric Dominion seen to the side. That does not exist until near the modern year within the setting, specifically because that was created only a short while before the 3 overlapping campaigns through the use of magic, and created a little bit of a stir when a new island nation suddenly comes into being. Chimeric Dominion is where the first of those 3 overlapping campaigns had begun, and Tessaria is the first continent that had been settled. You can see there are large swaths where the sea just flows right through, and a lot of that comes from the First Mage War, and causing that sort of stuff to happen. And around this area here is where New Hollowstone is, built upon the ruins of Old Hollowstone, and Old Hollowstone was one of the first settlements on Lenida, and underneath it is where the Dungeon of Droon was created, which will come up a bit later, especially having to do with things that occurred with the Mage War that later became known as the War of the Dead, and that is when Wayland Shars shows up in the timeline. So zooming out here, as I can get it to actually respond, we have the map of Lenida as a whole, and I will need to zoom it out one last time to show it in full. Alright, and you can see there are triangles on the side there. Those are little toggles that I have. They specifically deal with being able to pull up what some of the different settlements and territories, the ley lines, the underground tunnels that are going on, some of the other things of note. The map is not 100% up to date, because there are some things I learned about geology and world building and things like that that will affect how certain things are a little bit different than how they appear. Also making it more nuanced in terms of showing biomes, things like that. For the most part, a lot of it is going to remain as it is. There's also a island that will be present on some maps, but will not show up on modern map, simply because it no longer exists. It's between Okare and Beithatrum, and that is because it was destroyed in part of a ritual, which will come up in one of the books. Not exactly something that I'm going to give too much detail about at this present point, because that particular book hasn't been fully finished. But needless to say, entirely destroying an island can be devastating when it's in an explosive manner, or relocating a large portion of its mass through other means near the coast of another continent. Tsunamis, to say shortly. So then we move forward from negative 1520 BFW to negative 512 BFW, The intervening time between that, the 1500 years, is not as fleshed out, but it does involve dozens and dozens of mage wars between humanity and dragonkind, and between dragonkind and itself, and humanity and itself, and some of the other lineages that start to pop up are occurring in that time frame. Over on the Isle of Espis, which is right here, that is where the Kenthri end up showing up. They are basically evolved from a species that on Earth did not survive to the modern era, but on Lenida they do, and not only do they, but they end up becoming one of the sophont species, which is one of the recommended playable species within the setting. Kenthri are based on I'm blanking on the exact pronunciation here. One moment. Chelicotherium. Yes. They are odd-toed ungulates. They have basically the way that they evolved on Lenida is to be ancestors of the modern Kenthri. They kind of are what you might think of like gorilla horses, in a sense. If there's time, I will show some artwork of them as they are now. I basically took the Chelicotherium and gave them some traits that are a little bit like a giraffe, a little bit like rhinoceros, and keeping some of what they were as they are. With the second alpha of the FARAD system, centaurs were one of the player species, and one of the people who played it had issues with going upstairs and going downstairs, and used telekinesis to move themselves around, which can be amusing, but seemed ill-fitting for adventuring, and also drawing a little bit too much from common mythology. So I took that idea and reworked it, and hence Kenthri came about, because I remembered from a really old cardstock in a plastic container that I had of dinosaurs and prehistoric birds and other things, and Chelicotherium had been one of the things in there, and I just thought that they looked interesting, and after a short bit of Googling, I ended up finding that species again, and based Kenthri off of them. So, yeah, they evolve on the Isle of Espis, and the one moment here, I'm having somebody knocking at my door. Alright, sorry for that momentary interruption. I had let people know that I'd be recording and busy, and I still had somebody knocking because they forgot. Things happen. So, then the Felinae ended up evolving on several different points of planet Lenida. They are evolved from house cats primarily, and basically a lot of exposure to magic and alchemy and such over the centuries during the Mage Wars, and the effects of experimentation and the warfare itself slowly caused them to become larger and upright and eventually sophonts. I say slowly, but in comparison to the process of, evolution across millions of years, it's quite rapid. But it isn't like they suddenly became recognized as a species with rights and things like that, even until the Foundation War itself, though they basically started evolving in that period, which is less fleshed out. The Rainics evolved from foxes. However, their situation is a little different. There was a species of alien which visited Lenida and was surveying it, and a family of foxes that was curious ended up slipping onto their ship, and they were already far away from Lenida before they realized it. So they took them back to their planet and helped them adapt to their planet, and without any predators or humanity or dragonkind, trying to stop them from eating their food and things like that, basically ended up without any apex predators that specifically were targeting them, and with the aid of genetic manipulation and magic and technology, evolved into a species themselves, and then eventually came some of their tribes to Lenida again, closer toward the modern era. Not quite in it, but after the Foundation War was already done. Then in negative 512, before the Foundation War, the Dungeon of Druin was constructed in secret. It had been, after being constructed, traveling through tunnels dug throughout Lenida, sliding and moving around in a complex pattern that would make it take centuries to be able to try and figure out where it might pop up. And eventually it was stopped and returned to where it had been originally constructed, beneath what had been Old Hollowstone. In negative 505, before Foundation War, the Council of 13 within the Dungeon of Druin lose one of their original founders as the technology fails to revive them, and their mental backup is too corrupted to utilize properly. Daindarin Fulmara is advanced to join the Council at this time. Negative 491, before Foundation War, he accidentally summons someone to Druin within his own past, which was his present at that time, and learns some information about the future. Not a lot, but enough to clue him in that humanity would not truly be left alone in their battle with Dragonkind, and also would not come out supreme. But despite how bigoted that a lot of humanity was, he had been one who had been in stasis from the previous Aetherix, or at least his family had been, so he hadn't been as many generations of hatred against Dragonkind and the like, so he was more receptive to it than many of his peers on the Council of 13. He ends up in negative 479, before Foundation War, witnessing the birth of his grandnephew, Cadalweir Fulmara, In negative 470 before Foundation War, Dindarin Fulmara ascends to become the Numina known as Dindar. First Numina to ascend on Lenida itself, instead of arriving from another world, another realm, or another Aethrix. He was not the first Numina on Lenida. There would be some who are lost to history, and there would be some who left after Dindar and several others started coming up, and there are some that still exist within the pantheons on Lenida, but they are not as well known as Dindar is, specifically because Dindar is in multiple pantheons and helps to balance things and be the breaking tie vote on a lot of different issues. And he has had his hands in a lot of odd events to happen, including things to do with Kestrel Alrus, Metal Mage, later after the Foundation War. In negative 446 before Foundation War, the Mage War that would later become known as the War of the Dead begins. Ketelweir Fulmara is 33 at the time, and he is one of the ones who is most well known as the opposition to what would become the most well known Lich on Lenida. And Ketelweir was not initially a Lich, though he learned of that after using up what technology and magic he had known prior from his time in Drune. And his main opposition would not actually be born for several years later, because the War of the Dead was slow at first and then increased in speed over time. In negative 439 before Foundation War, not on Lenida itself, but on the Glens of Tyre, the Fey realm, Wayland Shars would be born. Wayland, in negative 429 before Foundation War, was among the thousands that left the Sprite Hollow region of the Glens of Tyre when he was 10 years old, because of the Sprite Hollow exodus caused by the pandemic that was occurring at the time. Basically everybody who was in that region either fled to other parts of Tyre before the region was quarantined, or they fled, as many did, to Lenida and other worlds in the primary realm or in other realms, so that they would not become trapped with those who had been infected and afflicted, specifically with the vampiric virus, which affects everyone in different ways. In particular with pixies, it causes them to rapidly burn through wild magic and end up with that chaos drawing upon some of their ancestral blood back toward the creators of the first Fae, the Progger, and basically forces them to either tap into deeper power or to simply burn up until they're a husk. And the majority who choose to tap into that power and try to channel it end up becoming sprites. Sprites do have fangs, they do need to feast on blood, but they don't have the same strengths and weaknesses that would be known by human vampires. specifically due to magic that was used to keep sprites that existed before the vampiric pandemic separate from the Sprite Hollow region, so named because it's where they had captured and kept them separate and took in other sprites and then forced them separate. They forced them out of phase, more or less, so that they wouldn't be harming and they could still be talked to. It was meant to be a mercy, but when too many people became infected and the spells weren't able to hold up anymore, it caused a bit of an issue, and people fled. In negative 428 before Foundation War, one of those pixies that was infected, named Mab Mistleaf, daughter of one of the explorers who ended up encountering the Vilru who create the vampiric virus, she ends up becoming infected and channels magic to change that ritual to, instead of binding the sprites to be out of phase with Tyre, it would force the excessive magic that was building up within them, instead of just simply burning off. If they didn't output it, it would jump them between different realms, including the primary realm. And so Mab Mistleaf becomes Queen Mab of the Mad Court after it's thought that she has died in the casting the ritual. And in fact, as a lot of people are gathered around her funeral, her body ends up emitting light and heat and burning away what had been draped over her, and she crawled out of the husk that had formed around her thought to be dead body. And she's called Queen of the Mad Court because the courts that fled to Tyre and outside of the Sprite Hollow region at the time considered what she did to be an affront to tradition, and that they would never recognize any of those infected as having any sanity left. And while over the centuries other regions would occasionally visit into the Sprite Hollow region, they would still keep up the quarantine as best as they could, those sprites being able to jump between realms could work around such quarantines. Others would have to take other routes, though there were some that are feasible. And one of the sprites that was in the FARAD system early on in the second alpha was one which Arundel met, named Drexel. And they were extremely chaotic and fun to roleplay a little bit as Arundel went around doing some of their assorted quests and decisions that they made in that mostly one-on-one RP that happened before the 3 overlapping campaigns. So, then in negative 425 before Foundation War, Wayland Shars joins the Mage War that would become later known as the War of the Dead. He is at this time 14 years old. And in negative 423 before Foundation Wars, he would become a general at age 16. Negative 421 before Foundation Wars, he would end the War of the Dead. Kidwell... One moment, we'll take a drink. Kittlewir Fulmara is 58 at this time, and Wayland Shars is 18. And Kittlewir Fulmara is thought to be killed and destroyed at this time. In fact, Wayland did destroy his body and shatter his soul, but as Ketelweir Fulmara had access to technology and magic that was not known elsewhere on Lenida at the time, while his soul was shattered and spread throughout realms and aetherixes, his mind had already been backed up and would work in secret across generations to try to reconstitute himself. Didn't go so well for him, took a long time, and eventually he was finally put to an end. In negative 419, before Foundation War, Wayland Shars is infected and he becomes a hobgoblin at the age of 20. Hobgoblins are goblins that have the vampire virus or are otherwise caused to have those specific traits exhibit themselves. They largely are like a regular goblin, except a bit leaner, a bit more scaly across parts of their body than otherwise, and they frequently produce flame from their hands and from their mouth as part of the changes that have undergone through them. With the magic that Wayland Shars has at this time, he's able more or less to be dealing with using it enough that he's not constantly creating fires everywhere that he goes. So this is not as massive an issue for him as it is for other goblins who become infected and don't yet know the magic to be able to handle that, or find a safe place to be utilizing the fire to drain that. Negative 335 before Foundation War, he becomes a true lich and leaves the public eye. At this time, his daughter, Alphaba, sacrifices herself to bring him back to life, and his wife of the time ascends and becomes a Numina. At this time, Wayland Shars is 104, and he would devote his time through to the modern day largely looking for fragments of his daughter's soul. He did manage to recover a fragment at the time that she offered up herself and put that within a body that was more or less a life-size doll that she had used for creating fashion and things like that nature. Since it wasn't her full soul, but just a fragment, she often acts a bit younger than she actually was when she ended up offering herself up. And she is that way because the soul itself contains some of her memories, but not as many of her later ones. She's more or less a teen, on the younger side of teen, mentally, until more shards are able to be found. Wayland Shars had been offered previously to be able to learn how to ascend and become a Numina, as his wife was doing. However, despite having friendship with many of the other Numina, he did not wish to do that. He felt that he had lived a long, good life, and was ready to pass on when it would be his time. However, Alphaba had been tricked by one of the Numina, who was a little bit more cruel, and hence she offered herself up, and he came back as a lich because the form he came back in was not going to last long, but he was not going to leave his daughter's soul shattered and not eventually find some way to find out who tricked her, since he still does not know, centuries later, exactly who it was. Numina, unlike a lot of mythological higher-powered beings, are not omnipotent or omnipresent. They have a lot of power. They can divide themselves up into avatars, create avatars out of some of their magic. They can travel into other aetherixes and split their consciousness and things of that nature, and split it through magic into different ways to look at different things across the entire planet. And there are ways of contacting them, such as through, prayer and things of that to them, that they can more or less know what's important to a lot of their followers. But somebody like Wayland, who's presumed to be, fine on his own because they're willing to offer him to become one of them, not exactly something that everybody was watching him constantly, because he wasn't a threat at the time. He was not. He could be. He ended a war that lasted decades, but he ends up having to search for a long, long time, and even in the modern era, within the setting, is still looking for fragments. So he's gotten several more, and in the 3 overlapping campaigns, the party had helped him to recover some. In negative 334, before Foundation War, Count Saverick would be born. Count Saverick will end up being a character that is within the Forge of Twilight series. And in negative 311, before Foundation War, Metka Saverick, who would later become known as Metka Thornbade, would be born. She is his daughter. In negative 304, before Foundation War, Count Saverick becomes a vampire. This is tied to the then consort of Mab Mistleaf, Queen Mab of the Mad Court. Negative 300, before Foundation War, his experiment untethers his land from Lenida, as he's trying to obtain power and more or less put humanity up in more power than what it had, in order to try and stop Dragonkind from, what his bigotry and the wars have led him to believe. His name is Count Saverick Valzildur. In negative 289, before Foundation War, Metka Valzildur starts training under Wayland Shars, as he is a lich at this time, and she learns a lot of magic. However, after 4 years of training, in negative 293, before Foundation War, she becomes unbound from her form after she tries to challenge him and force him to teach her stuff that does not seem suited for her, given her bigotry and growing concern of the danger that she might pose. Tempted it down for some time before he ended up finding out who she actually was. Negative 228, before Foundation War, a Celestial was summoned and captured in Sarsund, which is a island, which is the capital of an island within Hokari. That Celestial would become the ancestor of the main heroine in the Forge of Twilight series. In negative 217, before Foundation War, the Felinae that would become Tarash is born. Tarash would eventually ascend and become a Numina, the first Felinae to do so. In negative 212, before Foundation War, Raelvis Atkold Dunnaswolt is born. He is one of that heroine's ancestors as well. In 190 before Foundation War, he ends up exiled in winter. More information on that will be in that series, but he and that celestial ancestor more or less tried to convince his brother, who was Duke at the time, not to be as much of a asshole, and he took offense to that and decided to exile him rather than execute him, though he told the celestial who was pregnant with his child that he was dead. So his descendants wouldn't know that he still was alive until much, much later. In negative 189 before Foundation War, that celestial would become cursed in autumn by the Weeping Woman, Numina, who appeared a few decades prior. And this is because she chose to try to poison the Duke's mistress, who was the high priestess of the Weeping Woman on that island. And the high priestess interceded on the Celestial's behalf, begging not to kill her because she understood why she did it. So the Weeping Woman cursed her instead. And her descendants, which would include the heroine of the main series, to always obey that Duke's lineage. And through until start of the Forge of Twilight and onward, she would be of that lineage and unable to disobey, and have a marking on her face that would appear slowly over her years and become full in adulthood of a skull that's darker and grayer on her face than the rest of her skin. In negative 187 before Foundation War, Rael'Vas would become a vampire. This would be as a result of encountering Count Severick Velzilder. In negative 185 before Foundation War, Tarash finally ascends with the aid of Unate, the Iron Maiden. And this is because in negative 188 before Foundation War, he would meet Kestrel Alvarez when she accidentally traveled back in time without all of her memories, which, as mentioned in the previous live stream, knowing what changes you make in time can draw creatures that feed upon paradoxes and the like. But seeing as how she didn't know what she was doing, and she was meant to be there by meddling from d.e.i, she would end up causing him to end up ascending later on. And when it was her modern era, he would end up helping her in return. Negative 24 before Foundation War, Sirius Thornbade would be born, and in Zero post Foundation War, the Foundation War would end. The Foundation War would run from what was essentially 47 years. You would run from negative 47 BFW if it hadn't been re-zeroed. At that time, negative years have finally caught up to what had been the Foundation War and time moves on past then. However, it's already come up to an hour at this point. So I think I will stop at that point, and we'll move into the Foundation War itself and onward. Not a lot of detail on the Foundation War because a lot of that is still being dealt with another story that will be written later, dealing with notes and things. But suffice to say, Draconis Dragonkin ended up being created as a hybrid soldier species between some humans and Dragonkin that wanted to win the war between humanity and Dragonkind on their favor, and created a slave soldier species that worked with other species to more or less say, nah, we're not doing that. And that is why the Foundation War became known as the last major war. Would not be the last war. It would be the last global war until the modern era, when Siktar starts getting a little bit too big for its britches. But more on that another time. I will briefly just lower the map back down again and see if I can pull up something here. If it's, yeah, there we go. And show one of the characters that we've talked about for a bit here. If it will zoom in, there we go. And that right there is Wayland Shars, the great Goblin General, the Hobgoblin Lich, the one who makes the bones sing, the Bone Shaker. This is how he would look in the modern era, with some of the skin peeled back from his bony beak, and more scaly than as much feathers on his head. And I will zoom out just briefly again and move over and show these here are what were my original notes on the Kenthri, and how they walk like a Chelicotherium and knuckle walk. And this is their appearance. Of course, the program decides to freeze as I'm trying to move over a little bit. Come on, unfreeze. Livestream's almost over. Okay, there we go. You can see some. This is not the attire of the majority of Kenthri, but this is an example of one that would be more of a berserker. And just slide that across. And this is a Kenthri with their armor plating and such, without, any attire or anything like that covering them, other than just the simple lower body covering for modesty's sake. You can see they've got the triple horns and the long stripe of coarse hair that runs down their back to their tail, and the squat stance. And occasionally small birds that, like with rhinos, will attack insects and the like on their behalf. They can run quite quickly, despite that that gait that they have, being more like a gorilla than a horse. So, with that, I will bring the live stream to an end. Thank you, Gamer Wolf, for coming in, and a few comments here and there. And with that said, we'll end the stream, and in 2 weeks I will try to do another live stream, and we'll continue on the timeline, and we'll deal with some of the other lineages that are on Lenida as well while we're at it. And for now, just be signing off, and catch you all on the flip side.